Okay, you beautiful New Zealanders, good morning. I'm going to do a series, by the way, we're not Aotearoaites, we are New Zealanders, and let's keep that. Okay, I'm going to talk about Tikanga this morning, and I want to do a video about, there's a huge myth floating around New Zealand that Maori prior to 1840 had a system of law and government. That they had a judicial system, and the story goes that the British came along and they interfered with the existing Maori law system, or Tikanga they're calling it, Tikanga, and that Britain sort of brought their system of law in and it clashed with Tikanga. Well, what's the truth about this? Did Maori have law before 1840 or not? Did they have a common set of laws? Well, this is from the book by Adam Plover, and it's called The Benefits of Colonization, and you can get this from Tross Publishing. I'll show you the cover of this book in a minute anyway. One of the things that Captain Cook noticed about the people from New Zealand was that they were without any settled form of government. When Samuel Marsden and John Nicholas visited New Zealand in 1814 to 15, they too noticed the total lack of laws and system of law. Of the native superstitions, Nicholas wrote, it serves them in the absence of laws as the only security for the protection of persons and property, giving them an awful sacredness which no one dares to violate. Well, let me just highlight that and let's just go over this because I want to just talk about this for a second. That paragraph. What he's saying there is that, first of all, Maori had no laws here when Samuel Marsden was here and John Nicholas was here. We're talking about 1814, 15. All they had was superstitions. And notice what he says. These superstitions served them. Because that's all they had. They didn't have any laws. And these superstitions, they regarded with awful sacredness. Maori regarded them. Which no one dared to violate. While staying at Kerikeri, on his last visit to New Zealand in 1837, Marsden was approached by Wiramu Hau, a young chief who had succeeded Hongi Hika, that is. Howe presented the missionary with a letter appealing for the establishment of some form of law in New Zealand. Sir, will you give us a law? This is the purpose of my address to you. So this is 1837. This is prior to the treaty, because the treaty's 1840, 6th of February 1840 was the first signing ceremony. First, says this chief, if we say let the cultivation be fenced and a man through laziness does not fence, and should pigs get into his plantation, is it right for him to kill them? Do you give us a law on this matter? Should have been a question mark there, but that's all right. Do you give us a law? And he goes through second, third, he goes through a whole series of situations where Maori want to know what to do. Fourth, and then I think he misses fifth somewhere. But he goes to sixth. Here is another. So he misses the fifth. He misses one. And then the author, this is Adam Plover, says this. From this discussion, it was obvious that the concept of law was something that the natives were ignorant of, but wanted to learn about. So Maori had no law. This fits well with what Reverend J. Buller wrote of them. Their own rude law had been of one of brute force. Well, who's the Reverend J. Buller? Let's just have a look at that. We'll copy that and go to Google and just see who he was, just so we know what we're doing here. And it says, the Reverend James Buller, who left England as a missionary in the Wesleyan Church, landed at Hokianga on 1st of April 1836. So the Reverend James Buller was a missionary who arrived here 1836. Okay, we've got that. So let's go back to where we were. So he's an eyewitness. He's a guy living among Maori, a reverend, a Christian. Their own rude law had been one of brute force. That's the only law that Maori had. Without the aid of iron, the most trifling tool or utensil could only be procured by an enormously disproportionate outlay of labour in its construction, and, in consequence, became precious to a degree scarcely conceivable by people of civilized and wealthy countries. In other words, Maori had nothing made of iron, and they would do anything to get something made of iron. This degree, this great value attached to personal property of all kinds, among Maori that is, increased proportionally the temptation to plunder. So when other tribes had things made of metal, instruments or tools or utensils, what happened was other tribes became jealous and coveted and wanted those things. And he calls it the temptation to plunder, increased proportionally. So the more tools made of iron that Maori tribes procured, the more was their temptation to plunder, to go on a war, to have a war, to raid the other tribe. And he says, where no law existed or could exist of sufficient force to repress the inclination, in other words, where there was no laws to stop them going plundering and warring and stealing, every man, as a natural consequence, became a soldier. In other words, they went to war. Then he goes on and he says, their intelligence causes them theoretically to acknowledge the benefits of law. So Maori could see that there was a benefit to having a law, which they see established amongst us. So they could see amongst the British that the British had laws, and they could see that there was benefits to the laws that the British had, because they could see that British people were living, generally speaking, with peace amongst them and so on. But then he goes on, there's always a but, he says, their hatred of restraint, that's the Maori had a hatred of restraint. In other words, on the one hand, theoretically, they could see the benefits of law, but on the other hand, they had a hatred of restraint. They didn't want laws, causing them practically to abhor and resist its full enforcement among themselves. So Maori wanted laws, and they could see the benefits of laws, but they were saying, well, I don't want any laws for me, thank you. People to whom, for their own safety and their own preservation, we must give new laws and institutions, wrote F.E. Manning. So who was F.E. Manning? Let's look him up. And he was a missionary. Well, I know who he is. You just have to trust me. He was a missionary. You can look this up yourself. Who arrived here in 1833. And he worked among Maori. So he's saying, you know what? Even though Maori could see the benefits of law, they don't want any law because they wanted to keep on warring. They abhor them and resist its full enforcement among themselves. So they wanted everybody else to have laws, and they could see the benefit of laws, but they said, mate, we don't want any laws. We just want to keep on doing what we've always done. So F.E. Manning says, you know what? For their own safety and their preservation as a people group, that's Maori, We must give new laws and institutions. We've got to help these guys because they're out of control. Now this is Tikanga. This is Tikanga. The main law of Tikanga was utu, revenge, killing. Well, this is part 1. I'm going to deal with part 2 tomorrow. So we're knocking over the idea that is put forward today by Maori radicals and retribalists and people who want to take over the country, that Maori had a system of law prior to 1840 and it was going really well. And this is what they say, and it was going really well. And the British came in and interrupted that, so we want to reinstate tikanga in New Zealand as law. Well, that is absolutely a lie. That there was a system of law here in New Zealand and it was going well, and it was called tikanga, and we need to go back to that. This is a huge lie. Okay, see you tomorrow.